The pregnancy test struck the black Nero-Marquina marble with a sound like a gavel falling, and Tracy Davis felt her entire world fracture. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Impossible. Her fingers gripped the counter's cold edge as rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jaewon's penthouse, each drop a tiny detonation against glass. 40 stories below, Gangnam glittered like a circuit board, all neon and steel and money. Above it all, she stood frozen, her dark skin flushed with heat despite the bathroom's Arctic air conditioning, her natural curls wild around her face, eyes wide with something between disbelief and pure terror. This couldn't be real. They'd been careful. She'd taken her pills religiously every morning at 7, right after her first coffee, before heading to the National Museum for restoration work. Always careful. Tracy, His voice sliced through the bathroom door, low and smooth as aged whiskey, that possessive Korean endearment wrapping around her American name like a silk noose. The intimacy of it made her skin prickle, come out. She couldn't move. Her lungs had forgotten how to expand. Steel bands wrapped around her ribs, tightening with each heartbeat that thundered in her ears. I said come out. Not a request this time. A command delivered in that tone that made Seoul's most dangerous men disappear into shadows. The tone she'd once found thrilling when it was growled against her neck in the dark. Now it just made her blood run cold. Tracy forced her legs to work. The door handle felt like ice under her palm. She opened it and found Cha Jae-won leaning against the doorframe with the casual grace of a panther that already knew it had won. He'd discarded his suit jacket. His black dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing the obsidian ink that crawled up from his collarbone, a dragon mid-flight. Wings spread across his shoulders, scales disappearing beneath expensive Italian fabric. At 6'2", he towered over her 5'6" frame, all lethal elegance and controlled power wrapped in Armani and arrogance, but it was his face that made her breath catch and die in her throat. He wasn't surprised, wasn't shocked, wasn't anything except satisfied, like a chess player who just executed a checkmate he'd been planning for months. You knew. The words scraped out of her throat like broken glass. Oh my God, you knew. Jaewon's dark eyes tracked over her face with an intensity that made her skin burn and freeze simultaneously. Equal parts dread and something she absolutely refused to name. His gaze lingered on her lips, then dropped deliberately to her still flat stomach before rising back to meet her eyes. Of course I knew. We used protection every single time for 3 months. Her voice cracked, splintering on the mathematics of her own denial. Every single time. The words died as the truth crystallized. What did you do? He pushed off the doorframe and moved toward her with that predatory smoothness she'd once found mesmerizing. That controlled power that had made her feel protected when they walked through Seoul's night markets. His hand possessive on the small of her back. Now it made her feel hunted, cornered, trapped in a luxury penthouse with a man she suddenly realized she'd never truly known at all. I switched your birth control pills 4 weeks ago, he said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing dinner reservations or the weather. As if he hadn't just confessed to destroying her entire future with surgical precision. Replaced them with placebos. Vitamin C, actually. Good for the baby. The room spun. Tracy's hand shot out to grab the doorframe to keep from collapsing, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it pulsing in her throat, her wrists, behind her eyes. You tampered with my medication? I did more than tamper, Tracy. He took another step closer, and she could smell his cologne now, bergamot and cedar, and something darker, something that smelled like expensive danger. I calculated your cycle. I tracked your ovulation. I made sure that when I was inside you, when you were underneath me gasping my name, when I made you come so hard you forgot what country you were in, I made sure those were the nights that mattered. Heat flooded her face, shame and rage, and the traitorous memory of his hands on her skin, his mouth trailing fire down her neck, while he murmured filthy promises in Korean that she'd pretended not to understand. But she had understood, hadn't she? Every word, every claiming phrase. Ne jiot, mine. Naniun nioroyul jikio julgioya. I will protect you. Neonun iodido gajianha. You're not going anywhere. You got me pregnant on purpose. Her voice was barely a whisper, each word a small death. Yes, if you want to find out whether Tracy escapes Cha Jae-won's ruthless obsession or falls deeper into Seoul's criminal underworld, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, this story gets darker, deadlier, and so much more addictive. The casual confirmation hit her like a physical blow, like all the air had been sucked from the room. Tracy's hand flew up before conscious thought could stop it, aiming for his face, for that beautiful, terrible face that had smiled at her across gallery openings and breakfast tables. But Jaewon caught her wrist mid-swing with reflexes that reminded her he was far more than the art collector he'd pretended to be. His grip was iron wrapped in silk, firm enough to stop her completely, but careful, always careful not to bruise. "Let me go." She tried to yank free, throwing her weight backward, but he pulled her closer instead, reeling her in like a fish on a line until she could feel the heat radiating off his body, until his heartbeat slow, steady, absolutely calm pressed against her racing pulse. "Anya." "No." His free hand came up to cup her jaw, tilting her face up with inexorable gentleness to meet his gaze. "I'm never letting you go, Tracy, yeah. That's the entire point." "You're insane." She shoved at his chest, but it was like pushing against a marble statue, all muscle and ink and obsessive certainty that couldn't be moved. "I trapped us both." Something flickered in his eyes, something raw and almost vulnerable beneath all that arrogant control. "Do you know what happens when the head of the 7-star syndicate shows weakness? When word gets out that Cha Jae-won, the Grim Reaper himself, cares about an American woman? About a child?" The words landed like ice water. Syndicate. The room tilted again, the luxury penthouse suddenly feeling less like a home and more like a beautiful prison cell. "What are you talking about? You're an art collector, you. They'll come for you." His thumb traced along her jawline, and despite everything, despite the fury and betrayal coursing through her veins like poison, her traitorous body still leaned into his touch, still recognized the calloused warmth of his skin. "My enemies, the rival clans, the corrupt politicians I refused to pay, the snakehead family who wanted to tie me to their empire through marriage to their psychotic daughter, everyone who wants to see the Grim Reaper bleed. And now I've given them the perfect weapon. You, our child." Tracy's mind was racing, trying to reconcile 3 months of gallery dates and late-night conversations with this man, this stranger, who spoke casually about syndicates and rivals and death. Then why? Her voice broke. "Why would you do this if it puts us in danger?" "Because you were leaving." His voice dropped to something dangerous, something possessive and desperate and completely unhinged. "Your museum contract ends in 9 weeks. You were going to accept that position in Paris, board a plane, and vanish from my life. You were going to go back to being just Tracy Davis, brilliant art restorer, and I was going to become a story you'd tell your friends over wine. That intense Korean guy I dated in Seoul, past tense, forgotten." His jaw clenched, the dragon on his neck seeming to writhe in the shadows. "I couldn't allow that. I won't allow that. So you decided to baby trap me. That's your solution. Force me to stay by getting me pregnant? You think I had a choice?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only something dark and jagged and bleeding beneath the surface. "You walked into that gala at the L Hotel 6 months ago, wearing that red dress, red like blood, like warning signs I ignored, and you looked at me. Actually looked at me. Not at the Grim Reaper. Not at my reputation or my money, or the fear that follows me through Seoul like a shadow. You looked at me like I was just a man, like I was worth saving." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and she could feel his breath ghosting across her lips, warm and steady and intimate in a way that made her hate herself for not pulling away. "Do you know how many people look at me, Tracy? Thousands. And every single one of them sees the same thing: fear, calculation, greed. They see what they can take from me or what I might take from them. But you..." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to let her glimpse the human underneath the monster. "You smiled at me. You argued with me about whether American barbecue could compete with Korean galbi. You fell asleep on my couch watching K-dramas and made fun of my English pronunciation. You made me feel human." "Stop." She turned her face away, but he followed, his lips brushing her temple, her cheekbone, the corner of her mouth with devastating tenderness. "I tried to let you go," he murmured against her skin, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, a confession she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "For 2 weeks after I realized I was falling, I tried. I told myself I'd end it clean, that I'd let you have your Paris dream and your safe life far away from the blood and violence of my world. But then you'd show up at my door at midnight with tteokbokki from that street vendor you love, speaking broken Korean just to make me laugh. And I'd think maybe I could keep one good thing. Just one. Just you." Tracy's eyes burned. Her throat ached with words she couldn't say, with accusations that suddenly felt less clear-cut than they had 5 minutes ago. She was standing in a luxury bathroom with a man who'd just admitted to reproductive coercion, who'd calculated and manipulated and trapped her with the cold precision of a predator. She should be screaming, should be running, should be calling the police, the embassy, anyone. But he was also the man who'd held her through nightmares about her father, who'd taught her to make kimchi in his pristine kitchen at 3 in the morning, who'd listened, really listened when she talked about her restoration work, about bringing forgotten beauty back to life, about leaving a mark on the world that mattered. And now she was carrying his child, their child, a life that was already binding them together with threads stronger than steel, threads that couldn't be cut with anger or betrayal or even common sense. "I hate you," she whispered, but the words had no conviction, no strength behind them. They fell between them like dying petals. "I know." His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other pressed against her stomach with reverent possession. "Hate me all you want, Tracia. Rage against me. Fight me. But you're not leaving. Not to Paris. Not anywhere. Because that life we made," his voice dropped to a whisper that sounded like both a promise and a threat, "that's the red thread tying us together now. And I'm a man who knows how to hold on to what's mine, even when the whole world tries to take it from me." Outside, Seoul glittered like broken glass in the rain, beautiful and dangerous and impossible to navigate without getting cut. Tracy closed her eyes and let herself sink into his embrace. Just for a moment. Just long enough to catch her breath before the storm she could feel coming. Because if Jae-won was telling the truth about the danger, about the enemies and the syndicate and the target now painted on her back, then her safe American life was already gone. The only question was whether she'd burn in the aftermath or learn to dance in the flames. Jae-won released her slowly, his fingers trailing down her arms before letting go completely, and the absence of his touch left her skin cold. He moved to the bar cart near the window, all controlled power and lethal certainty. Tracy watched him pour water into a crystal glass, not cold from the refrigerator, but room temperature from the filtered pitcher. "You need to stay hydrated," he said without looking at her. "Room temperature is better for the baby." The casual knowledge made her want to scream. He'd researched this, planned this. While she'd been falling asleep in his arms, he'd been studying pregnancy like it was a military operation. He turned, extending the glass toward her, and she saw the tattoo on his inner wrist, 7 stars arranged in a constellation. The ink was fresh, the skin still inflamed. "Drink, Tracia. We have things to discuss." She took it, hating how her hand trembled, hating him for knowing her body's needs before she did. Jae-won picked up a remote, and the television flickered to life. A man in his 50s stood at a podium, silver hair perfect, suit immaculate. The chyron read, "Chief Prosecutor Kang addresses gang violence in Gangnam District." "You see this man?" Jae-won's voice had gone flat, emotionless in a way more terrifying than anger. He unmuted the broadcast, and the prosecutor's voice filled the penthouse, speaking about justice and order. Tracy stared at the screen, watching him gesture with practiced sincerity, his smile benevolent and trustworthy. "He looks like a hero," she whispered. "He's a predator." Jae-won turned, raw hatred blazing in his eyes. "The Snakehead clan wants my blood, Tracy. They want territory, power, revenge. That's business. I can fight predators." His jaw clenched. "But Chief Prosecutor Kang? He wants my soul. He wants me broken and obedient, paying tribute like every other organization in this city. He doesn't just own the law, he is the law." The television showed a crime scene, yellow tape and covered bodies. Jae-won clicked it off. 6 months ago, the Snakehead clan proposed a truce, he continued, moving toward her again. "Their boss offered me his daughter Minji, a marriage alliance to unite our territories, end the bloodshed, create an empire that could stand against Kang's corruption." Tracy's breath caught. "You were engaged? I was trapped." The word came out like a curse. "Minji is brilliant, beautiful, and completely psychotic. She collects fingers from people who displease her." His hand came up to cup Tracy's face. "Everything you're not," the implication hit her. "You used me to break the engagement. I used you to start a war I've been preparing for since they made that offer." His other hand settled on her hip, pulling her closer. She could feel the heat of him through her dress, smell bergamot and cedar and something metallic. The snakeheads assumed I valued power over everything. They were wrong. Tracy shoved at his chest, her palms hitting muscle that didn't budge. "So what am I? Your declaration of war? You turn my body into a political statement?" "No." His voice dropped dangerously. "I turned your body into a fortress. You're carrying the heir to the 7-star syndicate. Every rival, every enemy, every corrupt politician who wants leverage over me knows the fastest way to break me is through you." The words settled over her like a death sentence. Tracy looked down at his hand on her stomach, at the 7-star tattoo on his wrist. She thought about the art collector who'd made her laugh with terrible southern idioms. That man had never existed. "You're a monster," she whispered. Yes, Jaewon agreed, his lips brushing her forehead. But I'm your monster now, Tracia. And monsters are very good at protecting what belongs to them. Outside, Seoul glittered like a jeweled cage, and somewhere in that sprawling city, men were already planning how to take her apart to get to him. 3 days. Tracy had been a prisoner in luxury for 3 days, and the silence was driving her insane. The penthouse was soundproofed so thoroughly that she couldn't hear traffic, couldn't hear neighbors, couldn't hear proof that the outside world still existed. Only the scent of sandalwood from the diffusers Jaewon kept in every room, the rich smell of expensive leather from furniture that whispered wealth, and the oppressive quiet that made her feel like she was suffocating in velvet. Jaewon left each morning before dawn, returning after midnight, smelling like smoke and something copper-sweet she refused to identify. He never told her where he went, never explained the blood she'd found on his shirt cuff, the one he'd tried to hide in the hamper. He just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes and asked if she'd eaten, if the baby was okay, if she needed anything, as if she were a prize he'd won and now had to maintain. Tracy stood in front of his private study door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The biometric lock glowed red, waiting for a fingerprint she didn't have. But she had something better: 10 years of restoration experience working with historic Korean architecture, including the palaces that used hidden mechanisms and weighted pressure points. She pressed her palm flat against the wall panel beside the door, feeling for inconsistencies in the texture. There, a slight depression in the wood grain, almost imperceptible. She applied pressure with her thumb, while simultaneously pushing the decorative brass plate above the lock. The mechanism clicked, old-school engineering hidden beneath modern security, and the door swung open. The study smelled like him, cedar and bergamot and power. Tracy's hands shook as she approached his desk, the massive thing made from reclaimed wood that probably came from a demolished palace. His laptop sat closed, password-protected, and useless. But the filing cabinet in the corner, ornate, antique, the kind diplomats used in the 1,950 seconds that was analog, that was accessible. She knelt before it, her fingers finding the lockpick set she'd stolen from Jaewon's toolbox. Restoration work taught you how to open things gently, how to bypass locks without breaking them. 30 seconds, and the drawer slid open. Files, dozens of them, organized with military precision. She flipped through names she didn't recognize, businesses that probably fronted for illegal operations, ledgers written in code, and then she saw it. A folder labeled simply, Davis, James, 2015, her father's name. Tracy's vision tunneled. Her fingers went numb as she pulled the file free, as she opened it with hands that no longer felt attached to her body. Photographs spilled out. Her father's diplomatic car, wrapped around a barrier on the Gyeongbu Expressway. Crime scene photos, horrifically detailed. An autopsy report with sections highlighted in yellow, brake lines severed. Evidence of tampering. The words blurred. Tracy sank to the floor, her back against the filing cabinet, photographs scattered across her lap like obscene playing cards. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. And Jaewon had known, had the evidence, had kept it from her for... She flipped to the last page and saw a name circled in red ink. Mentor, Kwon Dae-jung. Ordered the hit. Eliminated 2023. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room spun. Jaewon's mentor had killed her father, and Jaewon had avenged him, 2 years ago, long before they'd ever met. He'd been carrying this secret, this evidence, this knowledge of her tragedy, and he'd still pursued her, still trapped her, still, movement, a flutter low in her abdomen, so subtle she almost missed it. The baby, their baby. A physical reminder that she was tied to this man, this monster, this vigilante who'd killed the man who'd killed her father. Tracy pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling that tiny flutter again, and wanted to scream. She should hate Jaewon, should run, should take this evidence to the embassy and burn his entire world down, but her traitorous body responded to his touch like he'd rewired her nervous system. Even now, surrounded by proof of his deception, she could remember the weight of his hands on her hips, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer and a curse, the devastating tenderness in his eyes when he'd looked at her stomach. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She could feel him in the shift of air, the sudden charge of electricity that always preceded his presence. You found it. His voice was quiet, resigned, not surprised. Did you know? Her voice cracked. When you approached me at that gallery, when you smiled at me and asked about Byzantine restoration techniques, did you know who I was? Silence. Then footsteps, slow and measured, until he knelt beside her on the floor, close enough that she could feel his heat, smell cedar and smoke and guilt. "Yes," Jaewon said simply. "I knew exactly who you were, Tracy Davis. I've known since the day you landed in Seoul." Tracy surged to her feet, photographs scattering like deadly confetti across the hardwood. Her vision blurred red at the edges, rage and grief colliding in her chest until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the overwhelming need to hurt him the way he'd hurt her. "You knew." She shoved him hard, and this time he let her, stumbling back a step. "You knew who I was, what happened to my father, and you still—" Her voice broke. "You seduced me. You trapped me. You made me fall in love with a ghost. I made you fall in love with the only real thing I've ever been." Jaewon's hands came up, not to defend himself, but in surrender, palms open. "Everything else was the lie, Tracy. The art collector, the businessman, the civilized man who belonged in galleries and museums. That was the mask." His fingers moved to the top button of his shirt. "You want the truth? Let me show you what's real." He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, each movement deliberate, and let it fall to the floor. Tracy's breath caught. She'd seen him shirtless dozens of times, had traced the dragon tattoo across his shoulders with her fingertips in the dark, but she'd never seen this. Scars, dozens of them, pale against his skin, crisscrossing his torso like a roadmap of violence. A puckered bullet wound near his collarbone, long knife slashes across his ribs, burns on his side that looked like someone had pressed cigarettes into his flesh repeatedly, deliberately. "I was 12 when Kwon Dae-jung found me," Jaewon said quietly, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "An orphan stealing copper wire from construction sites to sell for food. He took me in, trained me, made me into his weapon. The Grim Reaper wasn't born, Tracy. He was forged in blood and pain and absolute obedience." He turned, showing her his back, and Tracy's hand flew to her mouth. More scars, layered over the dragon tattoo, and words carved into his skin in Korean characters she'd never noticed. She stepped closer despite herself, her fingers hovering over the raised flesh. "What does it say?" she whispered. "Dogs who bite their masters die screaming." His voice was flat, emotionless. "He carved it into me when I was 16, after I questioned one of his orders. Wanted to make sure I never forgot my place." Tracy touched the scars, felt him shudder beneath her fingertips. Your father discovered evidence of Kwon's trafficking operation. Diplomatic cables, financial records, everything needed to bring him down. Kwon ordered the hit personally." Jaewon turned to face her again, and his eyes burned with something raw and terrible. "I didn't know until after. I was on a job in Busan when it happened. When I came back and found out what he'd done, I started planning. Not revenge justice. I spent 8 years building a case against him that even Chief Prosecutor Kang couldn't ignore, and then I killed him anyway." The words hung in the air between them, confession and threat and something that might have been apology. "You've been watching me," Tracy said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "For how long?" "Since you arrived in Seoul. I made sure you got the museum position, made sure your apartment was in a safe neighborhood, made sure every man who looked at you wrong understood the consequences." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I told myself I was protecting you because I owed your father that much, but then I saw you at that gallery, arguing with the curator about proper restoration techniques, your eyes on fire with passion, and I knew I was lying to myself." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I didn't want to protect you from a distance anymore. I wanted to be the fortress. So you trapped me." Her voice shook. "Made me carry your child so I couldn't leave. I trapped us both in the only safe place left before this war consumes everything." His breath ghosted across her lips. "The snakeheads are coming. Kang is closing in, and everyone I've ever crossed wants me dead. The second you got pregnant, you became the eye of the hurricane, the one place they can't touch without starting a bloodbath that will burn Seoul to the ground." Tracy's hands pressed against his scarred chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palms. She should push him away, should hate him, but his scars told a story her heart recognized: survival at any cost, violence as protection, love twisted into something sharp enough to draw blood. "I hate you," she whispered, but her fingers were already tracing the old burns on his ribs, mapping the evidence of his suffering. "I know." His mouth brushed her temple, her cheekbone, the corner of her lips with devastating gentleness. "Hate me tomorrow, Tracia. Tonight, just let me show you that some monsters know how to worship the things they love." His kiss tasted like cedar and destruction and desperate devotion. Tracy's back hit the wall, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious and breakable. and she kissed him back with all the rage and grief and terrible understanding that she couldn't escape this. Couldn't escape him. Couldn't escape the truth that her heart had chosen its monster long before her mind knew what he was. Outside, soul glittered with coming war. Inside, they drowned in each other. Two damaged souls seeking absolution in the only language they both understood: touch, heat, the desperate communion of bodies that knew tomorrow might bring nothing but ash. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and deceptive, as Mrs. O entered the bedroom with a tray. The older woman moved with the quiet efficiency Tracy had come to appreciate over the past week. Her salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun, her smile warm and maternal in a way that made Tracy's chest ache for her own mother back in Atlanta. "Good morning, Miss Tracy." "Mrs. O set the tray on the nightstand, the porcelain teacup rattling slightly. "I made you yujacha, citron and honey tea. Very good for morning sickness and the baby's development." Tracy sat up carefully, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The nausea had been brutal the past 3 days, and Jaewon had been surprisingly gentle, holding her hair back, bringing her crackers, his hand steady and sure even when she was at her weakest. "Thank you, Mrs. O. You've been so kind to me." Tracy reached for the cup, genuinely grateful. In this gilded prison, the housekeeper had been her only source of normalcy, teaching her Korean phrases, sharing stories about raising her own daughter, never judging the complicated situation she'd found herself trapped in. Mrs. O's smile widened, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "You remind me of my daughter. Strong, beautiful, deserving of better than the life you've been given." Something flickered in her expression, too quick to catch. "Drink while it's warm. The citron settles the stomach best when hot." Tracy lifted the cup to her lips, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of honey and citron. But underneath it, barely perceptible, was something else. Something metallic and chemical that made her pregnancy-heightened senses scream warning. She'd spent years working with restoration chemicals, knew the smell of solvents and compounds that didn't belong in organic spaces. Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. "What's in this, Mrs. O?" Tracy's voice came out steady, calm, even as her heart began to hammer. The older woman's smile didn't falter. "Just tea, dear. Citron, honey, a little ginger root for the nausea. And what else?" Tracy set the cup down slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Mrs. O's face. "What did you put in it?" For 3 seconds, nothing. Then Mrs. O's expression shifted, the maternal warmth draining away like water through a sieve, leaving something cold and calculating in its place. "You're smarter than he said you'd be. Park Min-ji thought you'd be easier to handle. American women usually are." The name hit Tracy like a physical blow. Min-ji, the snakehead heiress, the woman Jaewon had refused to marry. "You're working for them." It wasn't a question. Mrs. O reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small device. She pressed it once, and Tracy heard the distinctive beep of biometric locks disengaging throughout the penthouse. The security system Jaewon had assured her was impenetrable. The fortress he'd promised would keep her safe. "I've been working for the Park family for 20 years, dear. Long before Cha Jaewon bought this pretty cage and filled it with stolen art and false promises." Mrs. O moved toward the door with that same quiet efficiency, but now it looked predatory, purposeful. "The sedative in the tea would have made this easier for you, kept you calm while we did what needs to be done. But Park Min-ji said if you resisted, we should let you stay awake. She wants you to understand what happens to women who take what belongs to her." Tracy's blood turned to ice. "Where's Jaewon?" "In the garage, dealing with a convenient car problem I arranged this morning. He'll be trapped down there for at least 15 minutes. Mrs. O opened the bedroom door, and Tracy heard it then, the sound that didn't belong. The subtle whisper of suppressed gunfire, the muted crash of breaking glass. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the penthouse with military precision. Long enough for my associates to complete their work. The older woman paused in the doorway, and for a moment, something that might have been genuine regret crossed her face. "You seem like a nice girl, Tracy. I hope you survive this. But if you don't know that this was never personal, in our world, women are just ammunition in wars men start." She closed the door softly, almost gently, and Tracy heard the lock click into place from the outside. The penthouse's oppressive silence shattered. Footsteps in the hallway, male voices speaking rapid Korean, the distinctive sound of someone checking rooms, methodical and professional, 6 men, maybe more, spreading through the space like a disease. Tracy was alone, pregnant, and locked in a bedroom while assassins systematically cleared the penthouse. She looked at the window, 40 stories up. No fire escape, no balcony, Then she looked at the closet where Jaewon kept his weapons, the ones he thought she didn't know about. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breath steadied. The Grim Reaper's woman wasn't going to die cowering in a locked room. She was going to paint the walls with the blood of anyone stupid enough to come through that door. Tracy's fingers found the hidden panel in Jaewon's closet, the one she'd discovered 2 days ago while searching for a sweater. Behind it, mounted in foam cutouts like surgical instruments, were 3 handguns, and something that looked like it belonged in a war zone. She grabbed the smallest pistol, checked the magazine the way her father had taught her during their summer visits to her uncle's ranch, and felt the weight settle in her palm like destiny. The bedroom door exploded inward, splinters flying. Tracy was already moving, slipping through the bathroom into the hallway that connected to Jaewon's private archive, the room where she spent hours restoring centuries-old scrolls, where she knew every inch of space, every system, every weakness. Footsteps thundered behind her. Voices shouted in Korean. Something hot whistled past her ear and punched a hole in the wall ahead. She didn't look back, just ran, her bare feet silent on marble, her breath coming in controlled bursts despite the terror screaming through her veins. The archive door. She slammed through it, locked it behind her, and heard bodies hit it 3 seconds later. The wood was reinforced, but it wouldn't hold long. She could hear them arguing on the other side, debating whether to breach or wait. Tracy's eyes scanned the room with the clinical precision her restoration work had taught her. Ancient scrolls in climate-controlled cases, specialized lighting, chemical restoration stations with compounds that could eat through metal, and above it all, the Halen gas fire suppression system designed to extinguish flames by displacing oxygen, deadly to anyone breathing it. Her hands flew to the emergency oxygen masks mounted by the door, required by law for rooms with Halen systems. She strapped one on, twisted the valve, felt clean air flood her lungs. Then she moved to the manual override panel hidden behind a scroll case and pulled the lever. A soft hiss filled the room. No alarm, no warning, just the whisper of invisible death flooding the space. Tracy pressed herself against the wall beside the door and waited. 30 seconds. The battering stopped. She heard confused voices, then choking, then the heavy sound of bodies hitting the floor outside. Through the reinforced glass window, she watched 3 men collapse, clawing at their throats, their faces going purple before going still. The door burst open. A 4th man stumbled through, maskless, already dying but driven by momentum and training. His gun came up even as his legs gave out. Tracy moved on instinct, grabbing a restoration scalpel from the nearest workstation and driving it down into his shoulder as he fell. He hit the floor hard, gasping, bleeding, his weapon skittering across the marble. Tracy kicked it away and pressed the scalpel's blade against his throat, her knee on his chest, her hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside her ribcage. The man stared up at her with wide, terrified eyes, no longer seeing prey but predator. She could feel her baby flutter again, that tiny movement that reminded her exactly what she was fighting for. Who sent you? Her Korean was broken but clear enough. How many? The man's mouth moved, but only blood came out. His eyes rolled back, dead or dying, either way useless. The penthouse's silence felt different now, heavier, waiting. Then footsteps, fast and purposeful, coming from the main entrance. Tracy raised the gun she'd tucked into her waistband, aimed at the doorway, finger on the trigger. If more snakeheads came through, she'd dawn. Jaewon appeared in the doorframe, and Tracy's breath stopped. He was covered in blood, his face, his neck, his shirt soaked through with it, cuts on his knuckles, a gash above his eyebrow, but his eyes burned with something feral and devastating as they locked onto her. She was standing over a dead assassin, oxygen mask hanging around her neck, scalpel in one hand and his gun in the other, her brown skin flushed with adrenaline, her natural curls wild around her face like a dark halo. She looked like a warrior queen pulled straight from the ancient scrolls surrounding them. Jaewon crossed the space between them in 3 strides, his hands framing her face, his forehead dropping to press against hers. His breath came ragged, his whole body shaking with something between relief and rage. I thought, his voice cracked, when Mrs. O triggered the alert, when I couldn't get to you. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You're covered in blood. Not mine. Tracy's voice was steadier than she expected. I used the Halen system. 3 outside, 1 made it in. I see him. Jaewon glanced at the body, then back at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but recognition. You magnificent, terrifying woman. You didn't wait for me to save you. You taught me that waiting gets you killed. She lowered the scalpel, suddenly aware of how tightly she'd been gripping it, Mrs. O. She was... Snakehead plant. I know, she's dead now. His hands slid down to her shoulders, then her arms, checking for injuries with clinical efficiency. 6 men total, all eliminated. 7, Tracy corrected. You missed one in the archive. Jaewon's laugh was dark and full of something that sounded like pride. My queen just declared war on the entire Snakehead clan. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, tasting like copper and violence and absolute devotion. No more running, Tracia. No more hiding. You just proved you can stand in the fire with me. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, surrounded by death and ancient beauty, Tracy kissed him back and accepted the truth. She wasn't his prisoner anymore. She was his partner, his equal, his queen in a kingdom built on blood and ruthless love. The sirens were getting closer. Jaewon pulled Tracy through the penthouse, stepping over bodies with the casual efficiency of a man who'd walked through carnage his entire life. His hand was iron around her wrist, protective and possessive, his eyes scanning every shadow like threats might materialize from the air itself. We have 3 minutes before the police arrive. He grabbed a go-bag from the hall closet already packed, always ready. Kang will use this. He'll spin it as gang violence, use it as justification to bring me in. We need to move now. The elevator descended in suffocating silence. Tracy watched the numbers tick down, her reflection in the polished doors showing a woman she barely recognized. Blood spattered, wild-eyed, alive in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Jaewon's thumb traced circles on her wrist, the only sign of the fear he refused to show on his face. The parking garage was concrete and fluorescent lights, and 2 identical black SUVs waiting with engines running. Jaewon's men, the ones who'd survived the assault upstairs, stood guard. Weapons visible, faces grim. You take the decoy vehicle, Jaewon said, opening the passenger door of the first SUV. Head to the safe house in Itaewon. I'll draw them away, circle back, meet you there within the hour. Tracy's fingers clenched around his shirt. No, we stay together. Tracia. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. They're coming for me, not you. If we're together, you become collateral damage. Separated, you're just a witness who can claim ignorance. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips quick, desperate, final. Trust me, 1 hour, I promise. She wanted to argue, to refuse, to demand he stop treating her like something fragile after she'd just killed a man in his archive. But the sirens were screaming now, close enough to feel in her chest, and his eyes held that look, the one that said he'd already calculated every outcome and chosen the path that kept her breathing. 1 hour, she whispered, and let him help her into the SUV. The driver pulled out first, tires squealing. Through the rear window, Tracy watched Jaewon climb into the second vehicle, watched him raise one hand in what might have been farewell or promise. Then her SUV turned the corner, and he disappeared from view. They made it 4 blocks before the world exploded. The shockwave hit first a wall of pressure that rocked the SUV sideways, then sound, deafening and catastrophic, the kind that rattled teeth and stopped hearts. Tracy twisted in her seat, looked back through the rear window, and saw the fireball rising into Seoul's night sky. Black smoke and orange flames and twisted metal raining down like apocalyptic confetti. Jaewon's SUV, the exact intersection he should have been passing through. No, the word ripped from her throat. No, turn around, we have to go back. The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and she saw the answer there. The resignation, the grief. Miss Davis, I have orders. I don't care about your orders. Turn this car around right now or I swear to God. Blue and red lights flooded the interior. Police vehicles, 3 of them, boxing them in with practiced precision. The driver's hands went up immediately, surrender written in every line of his body. Tracy's door was yanked open, and hands rough, impersonal dragged her out onto the pavement. But these weren't beat cops. Their suits were too expensive, their movements too coordinated, and the man who stepped forward, silver hair, perfect despite the chaos, smiled at her with the benevolent warmth of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Chief Prosecutor Kang. Miss Davis. His English was flawless, Cambridge educated. I'm afraid you've been keeping very dangerous company. I'll need you to come with us for questioning regarding tonight's gang-related violence. Tracy's mind was static and screaming. Jaewon was dead. The man who'd trapped her, protected her, made her fall in love with his beautiful, broken darkness gone, erased in fire and twisted metal. And now this man, this predator in prosecutor's clothing, was touching her arm with false gentleness, guiding her toward an unmarked sedan like she was evidence to be collected. The interrogation room was exactly what she expected. Concrete walls, harsh lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor. Kang sat across from her, his smile never wavering, his eyes calculating her worth like she was livestock at auction. "Here's what's going to happen, Miss Davis." He opened a folder, spread crime scene photos across the table. "You're going to tell me everything about Cha Jae-won's organization. His accounts, his contacts, his operations. And in exchange, I'll make sure you're deported rather than imprisoned for conspiracy to commit murder." Tracy stared at the photos. Blood, bodies. The penthouse she'd called home turned into a war zone. She thought about Jae-won's lessons, delivered in the dark while his hands mapped her skin. Power isn't about who can hurt you, it's about who you refuse to let break you. "I want a lawyer," she said quietly. "And I want the American embassy contacted immediately." Kang's smile thinned. "You're a black girl from Atlanta who got mixed up with the Korean Mafia. Do you really think anyone cares what happens to you? You could disappear into our prison system and become a footnote, a cautionary tale." He leaned forward. "Or you could cooperate." Tracy met his eyes and said nothing, just stared back with the same cold calculation she'd learned from watching the Grim Reaper work. Silence was armor. Silence was power. And somewhere in that silence, she held on to the impossible hope that Jae-won had taught her one final lesson: how to survive when the whole world wanted you dead. The transport van cut through Seoul's rain-slicked streets toward the detention center, and Tracy watched the city blur past through metal mesh windows. Kang sat across from her, scrolling through his phone with the casual satisfaction of a man who'd already won. 2 armed guards flanked the doors. Escape was impossible. Then the driver's window exploded. The van swerved violently, tires screaming. Tracy's head cracked against metal as they fishtailed across lanes, horns blaring, until the vehicle shuddered to a stop on Mapo Bridge. Rain hammered the roof like bullets. Through the chaos, she heard shouting, gunfire, the wet sound of bodies hitting pavement. The rear doors were ripped open. And there he was, Jae-won, alive, soaked in rain and blood that wasn't his, a gun in each hand, his eyes blazing with something feral and devastating as they locked onto her. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe in the flashing emergency lights, alive with fury. "Hello, prosecutor." His voice was death wrapped in silk. "We need to talk." Kang moved with surprising speed for a man his age, yanking Tracy against his chest, his service weapon pressed to her temple before Jae-won could aim. "I should have known." The great Grim Reaper, always one step ahead. "Tell me, how many men did you sacrifice in that SUV to sell the illusion?" "None that mattered." Jae-won stepped onto the bridge, rain streaming down his face, both guns trained on Kang with surgical precision. Behind him, the Han River churned black and infinite, reflecting red and blue lights from the police vehicles screeching to a halt at both ends of the bridge. They were surrounded, trapped, with nowhere left to run. Tracy felt the gun's barrel dig into her skull, felt Kang's heartbeat against her back steady, controlled, confident, but her hands were still cuffed in front of her, and pressed between her palms was the shard of glass she'd palmed from a broken vial during the interrogation. The edge bit into her skin, drawing blood, but she held it carefully, waiting. "Here's how this ends," Kang called over the rain. "You give me the 7-star ledger, the encryption key to your offshore accounts, your blackmail files, everything. Or I paint this bridge with her brain matter and that bastard child she's carrying." Jae-won's jaw clenched, the muscle ticking. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he holstered one gun and reached into his jacket. Tracy's breath stopped. He couldn't. He wouldn't sacrifice everything he'd built, the empire he'd bled for, just to. He pulled out a flash drive. Small, innocuous, worth billions. "This is what you wanted?" Jae-won held it up, rain streaming off the black metal. "The keys to my kingdom? Every account, every contact, every dirty secret I've collected over 15 years? Toss it here," Kang ordered, slowly. Jae-won looked at Tracy, and in his eyes she saw everything: apology, devotion, the terrible mathematics of love measured against power. His lips moved, forming words in Korean she'd heard before in the dark. "Saranghae. I love you." Then he turned and threw the flash drive off the bridge. It arced through the rain, spinning end over end, and disappeared into the Han River with a splash no louder than a whisper. Gone. Everything he'd built, sacrificed, killed for, erased in one gesture. No. Kang's grip loosened for just a fraction of a second as shock registered on his face. Tracy moved. She twisted, drove the glass shard up and into Kang's wrist, felt it slice through tendon and muscle. His gun clattered to the pavement. Jae-won was already moving, crossing the distance in 2 strides, his weapon rising. The shot was thunder. Kang stumbled backward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief that his carefully constructed world was ending on a rain-soaked bridge. He fell, his body hitting the railing before toppling over into the dark water below. Police were shouting, running toward them, weapons drawn. Jae-won grabbed Tracy's hand, his fingers lacing through hers with desperate certainty. "Do you trust me?" he shouted over the chaos. Tracy looked at the river 40 feet down, churning and lethal, looked at the armed officers closing in, looked at Jae-won's scarred, beautiful face, rain streaming through his hair, his eyes burning with the kind of love that would let the whole world burn. "Always," she whispered. They jumped. The fall was endless rain and wind and the terrible certainty of impact. Then cold, shocking and absolute, the river swallowing them whole. Tracy felt Jae-won's hand in hers, refusing to let go even as the current tried to tear them apart. They surfaced together, gasping, and she saw the speedboat cutting through the water toward them, his men waiting with blankets and escape. Above them, police lights painted the bridge in red and blue, searching for bodies that were already gone. Jae-won pulled her against him in the water, his forehead pressed to hers, both of them shaking from cold and adrenaline and the devastating relief of still being alive. "I told you, Tracy, yeah," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't need a throne to be a king, I just need you." 1 year later, and the world smelled different. No gunpowder, no wet asphalt slick with rain and blood, no cedar and bergamot cologne that promised danger wrapped in expensive fabric, just sea salt carried on Mediterranean wind, wild thyme growing between ancient stones, and the clean, honest scent of peace. Tracy stood in her garden studio on Santorini, her hands covered in gold leaf as she carefully restored a section of Byzantine mural, a saint's halo that had been damaged by centuries and neglect. The work was meditative, familiar, the same kind of resurrection she'd performed in Seoul's museums back when her life had been simple and her heart had been whole. Sunlight streamed through open windows, warming her brown skin, and she could hear the Aegean lapping against cliffs below. She paused, wiping gold dust from her fingers, and glanced at the laptop open on the workbench. The Korea Times homepage loaded slowly on the island's internet, but the headline was clear enough even before the images appeared. "The Fall of the Seven Star. Posthumous investigation reveals Chief Prosecutor Kang's corruption. Syndicate collapses." Tracy clicked through to the article, reading about federal raids and frozen assets, about how an anonymous digital leak delivered exactly 1 week after Kang's death had contained evidence of 15 years of bribes, murders, and systematic corruption. The Seven Star Syndicate had imploded spectacularly, taking down 3 rival clans and half of Seoul's political establishment with it. The Grim Reaper's final act hadn't been murder. It had been complete and total annihilation of the world that had made him. "Mama!" The voice was pure joy, untainted by darkness, and Tracy turned to see her son toddling across the sun-bleached patio, 15 months old, with her curls and his father's dark eyes, skin the perfect blend of both their histories. He stumbled over the uneven stones with the determined fearlessness of toddlers everywhere, arms outstretched, laughing at nothing and everything. Behind him, Jae-won No, Hyun-woo now. That was the name on their Greek residency papers, stepped through the garden gate with a basket of fresh fish from the morning market. He wore a simple linen shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and Tracy could see the faint shadows on his forearms where the dragon tattoo had been. Laser removal had taken 8 months and left his skin marked with ghosts, barely visible scars that only she knew how to find in the dark. He'd erased the Grim Reaper, one painful session at a time, until all that remained was the man underneath the one who made their son giggle by making ridiculous fish faces, who taught her Greek phrases over morning coffee, who still woke sometimes with nightmares but reached for her instead of weapons. Reading about old ghosts, Hyun-woo set the basket down and moved behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder as he read the headline over her shoulder. His body was warm and solid against her back, familiar in a way that no longer triggered fear, only belonging. Just making sure they stay dead. Tracy leaned into him, feeling their son grab onto her leg, tiny fingers sticky with whatever he'd been eating. "Do you miss it? The power? The empire?" Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her neck. Then he turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with that same devastating gentleness he'd shown her in Seoul's rain, on that bridge where they'd jumped into darkness together. The sun had bronzed his skin, softened the sharp edges that fear and violence had carved into him. He looked younger, freer, human. "I didn't lose my empire," Tracia. He picked up their son, settling the boy on his hip, and the child immediately grabbed his father's nose with a delighted squeal. I just moved it to where it matters. His free hand cupped her jaw, thumb brushing across her lips. This, you, our son. The life where nobody's trying to kill us and the only blood on my hands comes from gutting fish. His voice dropped lower, intimate. This is the empire I was always fighting for. I just didn't know it until you made me human enough to want it. Tracy's eyes burned. A year ago, she'd stood in a luxury bathroom staring at a pregnancy test, feeling her world shatter. Now she stood in sunlight with gold leaf on her fingers and love so overwhelming it felt like drowning in the best possible way. The red thread, she murmured, touching the faint scar on his wrist where the 7 stars had been. It led us here. It led us through blood and fire and hell itself. Hyunwoo kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise, their son giggling between them. But it held. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure nothing ever cuts it. Outside, the Aegean sparkled like scattered diamonds. Inside, surrounded by Byzantine saints and gold leaf, and the laughter of their child, 2 people who'd been forged in darkness finally learned how to live in light. The Grim Reaper was dead. The art restorer had found her masterpiece, and the monster and his queen lived happily ever after in the ruins of the empire he'd burned down just to keep her. Some love stories are written in ink. Theirs was written in blood, survived by fire, and sealed with the kind of devotion that only comes from choosing each other when the whole world demanded they burn alone. And just like that, the red thread of fate, once soaked in blood and betrayal, finally pulled tight into a knot that no ghost from the past could ever undo. Jaewon proved that a monster will burn the entire world down just to keep the one thing that makes him feel human. But honey, the stories don't end here. If you felt every heartbeat of Tracy's escape, if you're team-obsessed protector and you need more of this lethal, addictive love, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the Ruthless Romance family. Smash that like button to tell the algorithm we want our romance dark, dangerous, and unapologetic.